Before I tell you about the dog, I need you to understand something. I've been around animals my whole life. I've seen horses that would kick your teeth out and cattle that trample a man for looking at them wrong. I thought I understood fear. I thought I understood anger. I didn't understand either one until I met a black and tan dog named Nothing, chained behind a gas station off Route 9, teeth bared at the whole world. Everybody who drove past that station said the same thing. Put it down. That dog's dangerous. That dog's gonna kill somebody. And maybe they were right. Maybe I should have listened. But something in me, some tired, cracked open part of me that I didn't even know was still there, looked at that animal and saw myself. And I did the one thing everybody told me not to do. I want you to stay with me through this whole story, because it doesn't go the way you think. It isn't a story about a hero saving a dog. It's a story about two broken things finding out they could still trust. And by the end, I promise you'll never look at a growling animal the same way again. So pull up a chair. This is the part I've never told anybody. The first time I saw him, he lunged so hard the chain snapped taut and jerked him backward off his feet. I remember the sound more than the sight. A metallic crack, then a strangled cough as the collar bit into his throat. He didn't yelp. He just scrambled up, planted his feet, and did it again. And again. Like the pain was worth it if it meant getting 1 inch closer to me. I was pumping gas into my truck at the time, half asleep, a paper cup of station coffee going cold on the hood. It was February, and the cold had a mean edge to it out there in the high desert, the kind that gets under your coat and settles into old injuries. My knee was aching. My back was aching. Everything about me was 53 years old that morning and feeling every mile of it. The dog was chained to a steel post sunk into the concrete around the back corner of the lot, next to a dumpster and a stack of old tires. Somebody had run a length of logging chain from the post to a cable around his neck. No water bowl that I could see. No shelter but the shadow of the dumpster. And this animal, this lean black and tan mess of muscle and scar tissue, was throwing himself against that chain with everything he had, snarling at me like I'd personally done him every wrong in the world. Wouldn't get near that one if I were you. I turned. The station attendant had come out to wipe down the pumps, a skinny kid maybe 19 with a wispy attempt at a mustache and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. He nodded at the dog. "He belonged to you?" I asked. "Belongs to the owner, Mr. Delgado, kinda," the kid shrugged. "Showed up as a stray last summer. Delgado figured he'd make a good guard dog for the lot on account of all the break-ins, chained him up back there and well." He gestured with the rag. "Turns out he guards everybody. Won't let a soul near him. Bit 2 people already. Cops came out once but Delgado swore he'd keep him tied." The dog was still going, foam at the corners of his mouth now. His ribs stood out like the slats of a fence. "He got water," I said. The kid looked at me like I'd asked whether the dumpster had feelings. "You can't get near him to give him any. Last guy that tried lost a chunk of his hand. Delgado tosses food at him from a distance. That's about it." I finished pumping, screwed the cap back on. I told myself I was going to get in my truck and drive the 90 minutes back to the ranch and forget I ever saw that animal. That was the sensible thing. I'm a sensible man, or I was supposed to be. But I stood there. I want to tell you why, and the honest answer is that I don't fully know. Except that I'd spent the last 11 months in a house that had gone silent, and I understood something about being tied to a place that had stopped being kind to you. I understood snarling at the world because it was the only language you had left for how much it hurt. My wife had passed the previous March. Cancer, the fast and merciless kind that gives you 4 months to learn a new vocabulary of hope and then takes it all back. Loretta, 31 years. She was the one who talked to animals soft, who could gentle a spooked colt with just her voice, who used to say every mean thing in the world was just a scared thing that had run out of other options. I used to think that was a nice sentiment. Pretty words. After she died, I stopped believing in pretty words about anything. But there I was, standing in a gas station parking lot, watching a dog choke himself half to death trying to reach me, and I heard her voice so clear it was like she was standing at my shoulder. Every mean thing is just a scared thing that ran out of options. "What's his name?" I asked the kid. "Ain't got one that I know of. Delgado just calls him the devil." I walked over to my truck, reached into the cooler in the bed where I kept water and a few sandwiches for long drives. I took out a plastic bottle, cracked the seal, and started walking toward the dog. "Mister," the kid's voice went up an octave. "Mister, I'm serious, don't. He'll take your arm off." I didn't stop, but I didn't rush either. I've learned a few things about frightened creatures in 53 years, and the first thing is that speed reads as threat. So I moved slow. I kept my body turned a little sideways. I didn't look him dead in the eyes, because a straight stare is a challenge in the language of nearly everything with teeth. The dog went insane. He hit the end of the chain so hard I heard something in his neck pop. The snarl he let out wasn't a normal dog sound. It was low and grinding, coming up from somewhere deep. A sound that said in no uncertain terms that he would kill me if he could reach me, that he wanted to, that killing me was the only thing left in the world he still wanted. I stopped about a foot outside the range of that chain, close enough to smell him, and Lord, he smelled like infection and old blood, and something underneath it all that was just the sour reek of an animal living in its own fear. Close enough to see that under the fury, his eyes were doing something his mouth wasn't. His eyes kept darting, kept flicking to my hands, to my feet, to the exits he didn't have. He wasn't looking at me like a predator looks at prey. He was looking at me like a prisoner, watching a guard he was sure had come to hurt him again. I crouched down, slow. My knee screamed, but I ignored it. I set the water bottle on the concrete, tipped it so a little pooled out toward him, and then I pushed it, gentle with 2 fingers, until it rolled just inside the reach of his chain. Then I backed away, sat down right there on the cold concrete, 10 feet off, and I waited. He kept snarling for a long time, 10 minutes, maybe 15. My tailbone went numb from the cold. The kid gave up watching and went back inside, shaking his head like he was witnessing a man's slow suicide. And then, because his body was smarter than his fury, the dog stopped. He didn't stop being scared. He stopped being able to ignore that he was dying of thirst. He lowered his head, keeping his eyes locked on me the whole time, and he lapped at the water that had spilled on the concrete. Quick, desperate laps, ready to snap back into a snarl at the first twitch from me. I didn't twitch, I just sat there and let him drink. When the puddle was gone, he nosed the bottle, couldn't figure out how to get the rest, and looked at me. Really looked at me. And for just 1 second, I swear this on Loretta's grave, the fury went out of his face, and what was left was so bottomlessly sad that I had to look away. I drove home that night and didn't sleep. I came back the next day. I don't know what I expected. That he'd remember me, maybe. That the water would have built some little bridge between us. It hadn't. He hit the end of the chain the same as before, snarling the same as before, and I sat down on the cold concrete the same as before and started over from the beginning. This time I brought a proper bowl and a jug of clean water and a bag of good food, the real kind, not the garbage Delgado threw at him. I did the same slow dance, crouch, set it down, push it into range, back off, wait. He snarled. I waited. He drank, he ate, he watched me the entire time with those flicking, frightened eyes. I did this every day for a week. I run a cattle ranch about 90 minutes north, and February's a slow month, so I had the time, though the drive ate up half my day and most of a tank of gas each way. My ranch hand, Gilberto, thought I'd lost my mind. "You're driving 3 hours a day to feed a dog that wants to murder you," he said, and when I didn't answer he said, "You know that's not normal, Jefe," and I said I knew, and he let it drop. Because Gilberto's a good man, and he understood without me having to say it that this wasn't really about the dog. I should tell you about that drive, because it became a kind of ritual, and rituals matter when your life has come apart. Every morning I'd wake before the sun, feed my cattle in the blue dark with my breath smoking in the cold, load the cooler with fresh water and better food than I fed myself, and point the truck south. The radio played out there or it didn't, depending on the canyons, and mostly it didn't, so I drove in silence past the same landmarks. The abandoned filling station with the collapsed roof, the wind farm turning slow on the ridge, the billboard for a lawyer that had been peeling for a decade until the man on it had only half a face left. I knew that road better than I'd known any road in years, and every mile of it I spent thinking about a dog. It's a strange thing, what the mind does when it finally has something to hold. For 11 months mine had been a clenched fist around nothing, around the shape of a woman who wasn't there. Now it had a problem to work. How to earn the trust of a creature that had every reason to trust nothing. How to move, how to sit, how to breathe near him. I read up on it in the evenings, at my kitchen table, an old man squinting at a phone he could barely operate, watching videos of soft-spoken people rehabilitating dogs that snapped and cowered. I took notes on the back of feed receipts. I felt, for the first time since the funeral, like a student of something. Like a man with a future that required study. The dog taught me more than the videos did. He taught me that fear has a rhythm, and if you match it instead of fighting it, you can slide inside its guard. He taught me that patience isn't passive. It's the hardest active thing a person can do, sitting still while every nerve says move, holding your ground while the animal in front of you screams at you to run. He taught me that the opposite of violence isn't gentleness. It's predictability. He needed to know that whatever I was, I would be the same thing tomorrow. And so I became the same thing, day after day. The man who came with water and asked for nothing. On the 8th day something changed. And I should tell you now out of order about the 26th day, because it's the day everything I'd been building finally cracked open. I kept a little log in a spiral notebook on the truck seat, day, weather, how close I got, what he did. A habit from the army I'd let lapse for decades and picked back up without deciding to. Day 26. Cold, clear, sat 4 feet, then 3. He ate from the bowl with me right there. And then he did a thing he'd never done. He finished eating, and instead of retreating to the dumpster, he lay down. Right there in the open. Put his scarred chin on his paws, let out a breath that fogged in the cold, and looked at me with those dark eyes gone soft and tired. And I understood he was too exhausted to be afraid anymore, that the fear had finally cost more than it was worth. I moved without thinking, reached out slow, the back of my hand first, the way you're supposed to, and I laid 2 fingers on the top of his head, on a patch of fur between his ears that wasn't scarred. He flinched. His whole body went rigid, a tremor running through him, and for one heartbeat I was sure I'd ruined everything, sure the teeth were coming. But they didn't. He held still under my hand, shaking, waiting for the blow that 100 human hands had taught him always came next. And it didn't come. And it didn't come. And slowly, slowly, the shaking eased. His eyes closed. And this animal that 2 men had lost fingers to, this devil, this killer, leaned the smallest fraction of an inch into my hand. I don't cry. I want that on the record. I'm a man who didn't cry at his own father's funeral, who held it together through every one of the 4 months I watched my wife disappear, who cried exactly once, alone, in a truck, the night after the burial. But I cried in that gas station parking lot with my hand on a stray dog's head. Cried so hard I couldn't see. And the dog let me. Lay there under my shaking hand and let me come apart, and I swear to you he understood. 2 broken things in the cold, and for the length of one held breath, neither one of us was alone with it. I did my crouch, set the bowl down, and when I pushed it toward him, he didn't lunge. He backed up, pressed himself against the dumpster, ears flat, but he backed up instead of coming forward. And I understood with a little jolt in my chest that this was the first thing he'd ever done in front of me that wasn't an attack. Retreating is trust when you're a creature who only knows how to fight. Retreating means you've decided the thing in front of you might not require every ounce of violence you've got. I stayed a little longer that day. Talked to him low, the way Loretta used to talk to the colts. Nonsense, mostly. Told him about the ranch. Told him about the cold snap coming. Told him he had a real ugly face and a worse attitude, and that I'd known men just like him in the army, men who'd been hurt so bad they'd forgotten they were ever anything but hurt. He didn't understand a word, but the sound of a low voice that meant him no harm, that, I think, he'd been starving for even longer than he'd been starving for food. By the end of the second week, I could sit 5 feet from him without a snarl. By the third, I could sit close enough to touch him, though I didn't try, because trust like that you don't spend all at once. I learned his tells. The way his ears would swivel when a car door slammed. The way he'd track Delgado's silhouette through the station window with a hatred so pure it was almost a physical weight in the air. Because Delgado, I'd figured out by then, was the one who'd made him this way. I never saw the man raise a hand to the dog directly, but I saw the scars. I saw the way the dog flinched at a raised broom, cowered from a thrown bottle, went rigid whenever Delgado's boots crossed the lot. Somebody had spent a long, patient, cruel time teaching this animal that every human hand in the world came to deliver pain. And then that same somebody had chained him to a post and called him the devil for believing the lesson. I went inside on the third week and asked Delgado if I could buy the dog. He was a heavy-set man with a gold watch and a way of not quite looking at you when he talked. He laughed at me. That animal, he's not for sale, he's my security. Best deterrent I ever had, nobody comes near this lot at night. He's suffering, I said. He's got sores on his neck from that cable, he's underweight, he needs a vet. He needs to do his job. Delgado shrugged, ringing up a customer's cigarettes without looking at me. You've been feeding him, I've seen you. Knock yourself out, but he stays. That dog leaves, my insurance goes up. I stood there a moment. I could feel my pulse in my temples. There's a kind of anger that comes on slow and cold and settles in for the long haul, and that's the kind I felt looking at that soft man in his warm store while the animal he'd broken shivered by the dumpster in the February wind. How much? I said, not a question, a threat wearing a question's clothes. Not for sale. He finally looked at me. Now are you buying anything or not? I bought a bag of jerky I didn't want and walked out. The bell over the door jangled behind me, cheerful and stupid, and the cold hit me and I stood in the lot with my fists clenched and my jaw so tight it ached. The dog was watching me from beside the dumpster. He'd stopped snarling weeks ago when I approached. Now he just watched, ears half up, tracking me across the concrete, and I realized with a fresh twist in my gut that he'd been watching the whole exchange through the store window, that he'd seen me talking to Delgado. That whatever a dog understands, some part of him understood I'd been in there arguing about him. I walked over and crouched at the edge of his reach, closer than I'd have dared 2 weeks before, and I looked at him and he looked at me and I said, quiet. I'm working on it, ugly. I'm working on it. His tail moved. Not a wag, he'd forgotten how to wag if he ever knew, but a single low sweep against the concrete there and gone, like a reflex he was ashamed of. It was the closest thing to hope I'd seen in that lot, and it nearly took my legs out from under me. That night I sat at my kitchen table in the Too Quiet house, and I did something I hadn't done since Loretta died. I got out the good whiskey, the bottle we'd been saving for our anniversary that never came, and I poured myself 2 fingers and I talked to her. There's this dog, I said to the empty chair across from me. You'd have had him eating out of your hand in a day. Me, it's taken 3 weeks and I still can't touch him. But I'm getting there, Retta. I'm getting there. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere out in the dark a coyote called and got no answer. The man that owns him won't sell, I said. Won't let me help him proper. Won't do anything but keep him chained up as a scarecrow. I turned the glass in my hands, watching the amber catch the light. I keep thinking about what you used to say, about mean things being scared things. And I keep thinking, what if nobody comes? What if I'm the only one who ever slowed down long enough to see it and I can't even get him free? I didn't drink the whiskey. I just sat with it, the way you sit with an old friend who can't answer anymore. I want to be honest about the marriage because I think it matters to what came after. Loretta and I were not one of those couples that never fought. We fought plenty. She thought I was too closed off, too slow to say what I felt, a man who'd let a whole afternoon of tenderness go by unspoken because the words felt too big for my mouth. She was probably right. In 31 years, I don't think I told her I loved her more than a couple hundred times, and every one of them cost me something, some old stubborn silence I'd been raised into. And then she got sick, and I found out all at once how much I'd been keeping locked up, and I said it every day for 4 months, said it until the word wore smooth, and it wasn't enough. It's never enough. There's no amount that fills the hole where a person used to be. So when I sat at that table talking to her empty chair about a dog, understand that I was also talking about every silence I never broke, about how I'd learned too late that love you don't spend is just love you lose. And here was this animal who'd been taught the same brutal lesson from the other end, that anything you reach for gets taken, that trust is just a wound you haven't gotten yet. And I would not, let him die believing it. I'd like to tell you that grief makes you wise. It doesn't. Mostly it makes you tired, and it makes you angry at small things, and it hollows out the middle of your days so that time just pours through you without catching on anything. For 11 months I'd been a hollow man going through the motions of a life. Feed the cattle, fix the fence, come home, don't look at her side of the bed, don't open her closet. Don't play the messages you saved on the machine just to hear her voice. Because you did that once in April, and it broke something in you that took weeks to set again. But somewhere in those 3 weeks of driving 90 minutes each way to sit on cold concrete and earn the trust of an animal that wanted to kill me, I'd started catching on something. Time was snagging on the dog. The days had a shape again. I woke up with a reason to move. I understand how that sounds. A man that pathetic, that a stray at a gas station is the thing that gives his life meaning. But I've never claimed to be anything more than a man, and men are pathetic creatures far more often than we like to admit. And if you've never had grief hollow you out, then you don't get a vote on what does or doesn't count as a reason to keep going. The dog was my reason, and Delgado had just told me my reason was going to keep suffering on that chain until it died there. The vet's name was Dr. Amya Reyes, and she ran a clinic in the town nearest the gas station. I'd never met her, but Gilberto's cousin worked as her tech and vouched for her, said she was the kind of vet who'd treat a stray for free and lose sleep over the one she couldn't save. I called her from the road and told her the whole story. The dog, the chain, the sores, Delgado, all of it. She was quiet for a long moment on the other end. "You said sores on the neck from the cable," she said. "Are they open, weeping, any smell?" "Bad smell," I said, "like something's rotting." "That's an infection, and if it's gone septic he doesn't have long." Her voice sharpened. "How long has he been chained like that?" "Since last summer." Another silence. When she spoke again, there was something in her voice I recognized, because it was the same cold, slow anger I'd felt in the store. An animal chained without adequate shelter, water, and veterinary care, with untreated injuries, that's a violation of the state anti-cruelty statute. That's not a maybe, that's a chargeable offense. A pause. But you'd need documentation. Photos, dates, ideally a witness. And even then, animal cruelty cases move slow, and a lot of them go nowhere because the owner just pays a fine and keeps the animal. If this dog's as sick as you're describing, he might not have that kind of time. I gripped the wheel. Outside, the desert scrolled past, gray sage and gray rock under a gray sky. "So what do?" I said. "Legally, you build a case and you wait and you hope." She let that sit. Then, softer. "Off the record, and I'll deny I said it, sometimes animals get loose. Chains break. Dogs wander off and end up at a clinic where a kind vet finds them microchipless and unclaimed, and well, these things happen." I understood exactly what she was telling me. And I want you to understand the weight of it, because this is the part I still turn over at night. She was telling me I could steal him, that I could break the chain, load 100 pounds of terrified muscle and teeth into my truck, an animal that had bitten 2 men and still wouldn't let me touch him, and drive him to her clinic and launder him into a new life through a lie. It was theft. It was, technically, a crime. And Delgado, soft and cruel and lawyered up, could make it a real one for me if he wanted to. I had a ranch. I had a reputation in 3 counties. I was a man who paid his taxes and coiled his hoses and never once in 53 years took a thing that wasn't mine. And I sat in my truck outside that gas station and looked at the dog by the dumpster, at the sores on his neck that I now knew were killing him, at those flicking frightened eyes that had finally started to look at me like I might be the one human in the world who wasn't going to hurt him. And I started doing the math on how a man breaks a logging chain. That's where I'll leave the first part, because what happened next took more out of me than anything has since the day I buried my wife, and you deserve to hear it told right and told slow. But I'll tell you this much, so you don't lie awake wondering. When I made my choice that afternoon, I made it with my hands shaking and my heart going like a hammer and Loretta's voice in my ear. And I have never once regretted it. I want to say that plainly because for a whole day and a night I was going to. I'd bought the bolt cutters. They were on the seat of my truck, $40 of red-handled steel, and I'd driven down there before dawn with my heart in my throat and a horse blanket in the truck bed to wrap him in, and a plan that was really just a hope wearing a plan's clothes. Get the chain cut. Get him loaded. Get gone before Delgado opened up at 7. Drive straight to Dr. Ray's and let her work her quiet magic and turn a stolen dog into an unclaimed stray. I sat in that dark lot with the engine off and my hands on the wheel, and I could not do it. Not because I was afraid of getting caught, though I was, and not because I thought Delgado deserved to keep him, because God knows he didn't. It was something Loretta would have understood, and I had to sit in the cold a long time to understand myself. If I stole that dog, I'd be teaching him one more time that the world is a place where things get grabbed in the dark and hauled off against their will. I'd be one more pair of human hands taking him somewhere he didn't choose to go. He'd spent his whole life at the mercy of people who did things to him. I couldn't stand to be another one, even a kind one, even to save his life. There had to be a way to do this that let him keep his dignity, that let it be, somehow, his choice. I didn't know what that way was yet, but I put the bolt cutters back in the toolbox, and I drove home as the sun came up, and I felt like a coward and a fool and somehow underneath, like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. I need you to understand how close it was, though. How thin the line was between the man who drove home empty-handed and the man who almost didn't. Because in the movies the good choice arrives clean, with music under it, and you know it's good because the hero's jaw is set right. It doesn't work that way in a cold truck at 5 in the morning. In a cold truck at 5 in the morning, the good choice looks exactly like weakness. It looks like you're too gutless to do the hard, necessary thing. It looks like you're going to drive away and let a dying animal keep dying because you were afraid of a misdemeanor. I sat there and I called myself every name I had. And the whole time, some quieter voice underneath the loud one kept saying the same thing. Not like this. Not one more thing done to him in the dark. Not from you. That voice sounded like Loretta. It usually does when it's telling me something I don't want to hear but need to. I'd spent our whole marriage being the practical one. She was the soft heart and I was the hard head, and I used to think that was a good division of labor, that a marriage needs one of each. What I understood in that truck, 11 months too late, was that I'd been leaning on her softness my whole life the way you lean on a wall, without noticing it was holding you up until it's gone and you fall. For 11 months I'd been falling. And here, finally, was a thing she'd have wanted done, and a chance to do it the way she'd have done it, which is to say the patient way, the kind way, the way that costs you more and takes longer and lets the frightened thing keep its dignity. I could be practical or I could be hers. For once I chose to be hers. The way came from Dr. Ray's 3 days later, and it came in the form of a phone call that started with her saying, "I need you to not get your hopes up," which is a thing people only say right before something hopeful. She'd been busy. That's the part I didn't know, the part that still humbles me. While I'd been agonizing alone in my truck, she'd been on the phone. She'd called the county animal control officer, a woman named Ruth Deng who, it turned out, had been trying to build a cruelty case against Delgado for the better part of a year and had never had enough to move on. Rays gave her enough. My weeks of observations. The photos I'd been taking without even knowing why. The sores, the cable, the empty concrete where a water bowl should be, each one time-stamped. Ray's professional statement that the animal's injuries constituted untreated, life-threatening neglect. It's still not a slam dunk, Ray's told me. But Ruth thinks she can get a warrant to seize the animal for medical evaluation. That gets him off the chain and into my clinic legally. Delgado can contest it, and he might, but once I've documented the full extent of what's been done to that dog, no judge in this county is giving him back. Not with an election coming. I sat down on my kitchen floor, just sat down right there against the cabinets with the phone to my ear. When? I said. Ruth's serving it tomorrow morning. She asked if you'd be there. A pause. She said, and I quote, "Tell the cowboy the dog trusts we're going to need the cowboy the dog trusts." I was there at 6:30. Ruth Deng turned out to be a small, unsmiling woman in a county uniform with the flat, patient eyes of somebody who has seen every ugly thing people do to animals, and decided to spend her one life standing between the animals and the people. She had a sheriff's deputy with her, and a warrant in a manila folder, and a catch pole in the back of her truck that made my stomach turn just to look at. That long aluminum rod with the noose on the end that they use on dogs they can't handle. "That's a last resort," she said, watching my face. "I don't like using it any more than you like looking at it. But that animal has a bite history, and if we can't load him safe, I can't have him hurting my deputy. You understand?" I understood. I understood better than she knew, because I'd spent 3 weeks learning the exact geography of that dog's fear, every trigger and every tell, and I knew that pole would be the single worst thing that could happen to him. Not the pain of it, dogs survive pain. The betrayal of it. He'd finally, barely, started to believe that a human being could approach him without violence, and one snap of that noose would burn the belief to ash and salt the ground. Whatever we saved of his body, we'd lose all of his heart. And a dog with no heart left isn't saved. It's just alive, which isn't the same thing, which is a lesson I'd learned the hard way in my own kitchen over 11 silent months. "Let me try first," I said. "Before the pole, just let me try." She looked at me a long moment, then she nodded once. "You've got till Delgado wakes up and starts making trouble. After that, we do it my way." The lot in the gray dawn looked the same as it always had and completely different. Same dumpster, same tires, same steel post. But this morning it was ringed with strangers and vehicles, and the air had that charged, brittle quality it gets right before something breaks one way or the other. My breath smoked. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Over by the dumpster the dog was already up, already reading the wrongness in the air, ears pinned, a low sound starting in his chest. He didn't know we'd come to save him. How could he? Every other time humans had gathered around him in a group, it had gone badly. As far as he knew, this was just the biggest and most frightening ambush of his life. Delgado came out at 7 and made trouble. He came boiling out of that station in his shirt sleeves, red-faced, shouting about his property and his rights and his lawyer, and the deputy peeled off to deal with him while Ruth showed him the warrant, and I tuned all of it out. Because I was already walking across the lot toward the dumpster, slow, sideways, not looking at the dog dead on, doing the dance I'd done 30 times before. And the dog was going insane. Not at me, at all of it. At the shouting and the strangers and the uniforms and the truck and the chaos, all the chaos, in the one small patch of concrete that had become his whole world. He was hitting the end of the chain and screaming that low, grinding scream, and I could see him coming apart, could see 3 weeks of hard-won calm evaporating in the panic. And I understood that if he got over threshold, if the fear crested all the way, there'd be no reaching him, and Ruth would have to use the pole, and every terrible lesson the world had ever taught him would be confirmed in one violent morning. So I did the only thing I had. I sat down. Right there on the cold concrete, 10 feet from him, in the middle of all that noise, I lowered myself down the way I had that very first day, and I made myself small and still and quiet, and I started to talk. Low, nonsense. The same nonsense I always talked. About the ranch, about the cold, about how ugly he was and how bad his attitude was. The words didn't matter. The sameness mattered. In a world that had just exploded into chaos, I was the one thing that was exactly what it had always been. While the shouting behind me faded, I found out later the deputy had walked Delgado back inside. The lot went quiet except for my low voice and the dog's ragged breathing. And slowly, the way a storm doesn't stop so much as lose its strength, the dog came down. The snarl guttered out. He stopped hitting the chain. He stood there trembling, foam on his mouth, ribs heaving, looking at me with those dark eyes that were drowning, and I held his gaze soft and I said, "There you are. There you are, ugly. I know, it's a lot. Come here to me now." And he came. He came to the end of the chain and stopped, because the chain was all he'd ever known. And I reached out slow, and I laid my hand on his scarred head, and I felt him lean into it, shaking. The whole trembling weight of him leaning into the one hand in the world that had never hurt him. "Now," I said quietly, not turning around, "bring the cutters slow." Ruth Deng crossed that lot like she was walking on eggshells. She handed me the bolt cutters, my own bolt cutters, that she'd found in my truck toolbox and understood without asking, and she stepped back. And with one hand still on the dog's head, murmuring the whole time, I fit the jaws around the cable at his neck and I squeezed, and the cable parted with a snap. For the first time since last summer, the dog was not chained to anything. He didn't run. That's the thing that undid me. A free animal, a terrified animal, a whole open lot and the desert beyond it, and he didn't run. He stood there under my hand with the broken cable hanging from his ruined neck, and he looked up at me and he waited to see what I wanted. Because somewhere in 3 weeks of water and low talk and a hand that never struck, this creature that the whole world had given up on had decided that whatever I was, he'd go where I went. I stood up slow. My knee screamed. I didn't care. "Come on," I said, and I walked toward my truck, and the dog walked with me, pressed against my leg, flinching at every sound but walking. And I opened the door and patted the seat, and he gathered himself and jumped up into the cab like he'd done it 1,000 times, like he'd been waiting his whole hard life for somebody to open a door and mean it. Ruth Deng watched the whole thing without a word. When I looked at her, her flat, patient eyes were wet, and she looked away fast and cleared her throat and said, "I've been doing this 11 years. Never seen a bite history dog load like that. Not once." She shook her head. "He chose you." "No," I said. My own voice came out rough. "We chose each other." The drive to the clinic was 20 minutes, and I remember every one of them. He rode pressed against the passenger door at first, as far from me as the cab allowed, shaking, the broken cable still around his neck, because there hadn't been time to get it off. Every time I shifted or the truck hit a bump, he'd startle. But somewhere around the halfway point, I don't know what changed, maybe just exhaustion, maybe the simple accumulating evidence that the truck was warm and the man in it wasn't hurting him. He slid across the bench seat, one careful inch at a time, until his body was against my leg. And he put his heavy scarred head on my thigh. And he let out a breath, a long shuddering breath that emptied him all the way out, and he slept. A dog who'd probably not truly slept, not deep and defenseless, in the whole time he'd been on that chain. He slept with his head on my leg while I drove one-handed and kept my other hand resting light on his side, feeling it rise and fall, and I had to keep blinking the road clear. It wasn't a clean ending. I told you at the start it wouldn't be. The infection in his neck was worse than Ray's had feared. She had him on the table within the hour, and the surgery took most of the afternoon, and when she came out to the waiting room where I'd been sitting for 4 hours not moving, her scrubs had his blood on them and her face was grave. The sepsis had spread. There was damage to the muscle, to the tissue, that she'd cleaned out as best she could, but the next 72 hours would tell whether his body could fight the rest. "He's strong," she said. "Stronger than he has any right to be after what he's been through, but I won't lie to you. It could go either way. I've seen dogs healthier than him lose this fight." I asked if I could see him. She said he was still under, that I should go home and rest, that there was nothing I could do. I did not go home. I slept in a plastic chair in her waiting room for 3 nights, eating from a vending machine, and Ray stopped trying to send me away after the first night because she understood a thing about me by then. The same thing Loretta had understood, that I am not built to leave a post, that whatever else I am, I stay. Those 3 nights were the longest since the hospital, and they had that same underwater quality, that suspended feeling where the ordinary world, my cattle, my ranch, Gilberto handling the whole operation alone, and texting me it's fine Hefe, stay with your dog, all of it went distant and unreal, and the only real thing in the universe was the door to the back where a machine was helping an animal breathe. I'd sat in a chair like this before, in a hospital, watching a different door, waiting on a different fight I already knew the ending of. I think part of why I couldn't leave was that I hadn't been able to save her. I couldn't save Loretta no matter how long I sat, no matter how still I held, no matter what I'd have traded. And some animal part of my brain had decided that this time, if I just stayed, if I just refused to leave the post, I could hold a different door shut against a different ending. It's not rational. Grief isn't rational. But I'll tell you, sitting in that plastic chair those 3 nights, I finally cried for Loretta the way I hadn't let myself in 11 months. Not the one hard, clean cry in the truck after the burial, but the long, slow, leaking grief that I'd been too proud and too frozen to feel. It came out of me in that waiting room a little at a time, night after night, and I think it had to. I think the dog cracked something open that had been sealed shut since March, and once it was open, the whole flood of it finally had somewhere to go. Ray's brought me coffee at 3 in the morning once and found me with my face in my hands, and she didn't say anything, just set the cup down and put her hand on my shoulder a moment and went back to work. Good people don't always need words. She knew what she was looking at. She'd seen it before, in that waiting room, on the faces of people who'd stopped being able to tell where the grief for the animal ended, and the grief for everything else began. On the 3rd night his fever broke. Ray's came and got me at 2 in the morning, and she led me back to the kennel where he lay on a heap of blankets with a drain in his neck and a cone around his head, looking like the most pitiful thing God ever made, and when he heard my boots on the concrete he lifted his head. His tail moved, not a reflex this time. A real wag, weak and lopsided, thumping against the blankets, and he made a sound I'd never heard him make, a low broken whine that wasn't fear and wasn't pain, that was just unmistakably hello. I got down on the floor of that kennel in my dirty clothes at 2 in the morning and I put my arms around a dog the whole world had called a devil, and he pressed his coned head into my chest, and we stayed like that a long time. Dr. Ray's left us alone. Somewhere a machine beeped soft and steady, and I thought about my wife, who talked to animals gentle, who believed every mean thing was just a scared thing out of options, and I thought, you were right, Retta. God, you were right about everything, and I was too slow and too silent to tell you so while you were here to hear it. But I heard you. In the end, I heard you. And look what your voice went and did. I named him Chance. Not because it's clever, though I suppose it is. I named him that because Ruth Deng said he chose me, and I said we chose each other, and the truth underneath both of those things is that neither one of us should have gotten another shot at anything. A broken widower and a broken dog, both of us out of options, both of us snarling at a world that had stopped being kind. And somehow, against every sensible thing, we took a chance on each other. So that's his name, Chance. He answers to it now. Took him a while to believe a name could be a kind thing instead of a thing shouted right before a blow, but he believes it now. Delgado did contest the seizure for exactly as long as it took his lawyer to see Ray's photographs of that dog's neck. Then he dropped it and paid a fine, and last I heard, doesn't keep animals at the station anymore. Ruth Deng saw to that. She and I still talk. She sends me the hard cases sometimes now, the fearful ones, the bite history ones, the ones other people have given up on, and asks if I've got room on the ranch and a little patience left over. I usually do. Turns out patience is the one thing grief left me a surplus of. There's a new one coming next week, as it happens. Ruth called yesterday. A horse this time, not a dog. A mare somebody starved and beat until she won't let a soul near her. Rears and strikes at anyone who steps in the paddock, and they were talking about putting her down because nobody can handle her and nobody wants to try. Ruth asked if I'd take a look before it comes to that. I said I would. Didn't even have to think about it. Loretta gentled colts with just her voice. I've got her voice in me now, whether I earned it or not, and a barn with an empty stall, and a dog who will be curious about a new frightened thing to look after. Chance has gotten good at that, oddly, sitting quiet outside a stall, a calm, steady presence, teaching some other terrified animal by his own example that the humans here don't hurt you. The rescued becoming the rescuer. I don't know yet if the mare will make it. Some of them don't. But I know I'll try, and I know how I'll do it, slow and sideways, and the same thing tomorrow as today. And I know there'll be a moment, if I'm patient enough, where a broken thing decides to take a chance. There always is. That's the thing I've learned. There always is. Chance runs the ranch now like he was born to it. He's still got his quirks. He'll never love a raised broom, and a slammed door still puts him flat to the floor for a second before he remembers he's safe. The scars on his neck grew back with a white stripe of fur, a permanent collar he'll wear the rest of his life, a mark of the chain that isn't there anymore. Sometimes at night he wakes up with his legs running, chasing something in a dream, whimpering, and I put my hand on his side in the dark the way I used to reach for Loretta, and he settles. We settle each other. Two old broken things that learned later than we should have, that the reaching is worth the risk of the wound. The first few months weren't easy, and I won't pretend they were, because I've been honest with you this whole way, and I'm not going to start lying at the finish. He didn't come home fixed. He came home terrified of the mud room, of the kitchen tile, of Gilberto, of the sound the propane tank makes when it kicks on. He soiled the floor for weeks because being outside alone frightened him worse than being scolded, though I never once scolded him. There were nights I wondered if the damage was too deep, if I'd saved a body and lost the dog inside it after all, if some cruelties go so far down that no amount of patience reaches the bottom. And then there'd be a morning where he'd bring me a boot he'd stolen, tail going, proud as anything, wanting to be chased for it. Some ordinary silly dog thing surfacing out of him like a memory of an animal he might have been in a kinder life, and I'd know the dog was still in there, just buried. Just waiting, the way I'd been waiting, for somebody with the patience to dig. Loretta would have loved him. That's the thought that gets me still, standing in the yard watching him move the cattle with an instinct nobody taught him. She spent her whole life gentling the frightened ones, and the one time it mattered most, she wasn't here to do it, so her voice reached down through 11 months of my silence and did it through my hands instead. I don't believe in much anymore. Grief burned a lot of it out of me. But I believe that somehow, on a February morning in a gas station parking lot, my wife saved a dog's life using a stubborn old man as her instrument, and in doing it, saved the stubborn old man too. People still ask me why I did it. Why I drove 3 hours a day for a dog that wanted to kill me. Why I slept in a plastic chair for 3 nights. Why a sensible man threw over every sensible thing for an animal the whole world had written off. I never have a good answer. I usually just say he needed somebody to slow down. But that's not the whole truth, and you've stayed with me this long, so you've earned the whole truth. The truth is I needed him more than he ever needed me. I was the one dying on a chain I couldn't see. I was the one who'd been snarling at the world for 11 months because grief had run me out of every other option. And a scared, scarred, snapping stray behind a gas station looked at me across a lot full of cold February light, and did the one thing nobody had done for me since the day I lost my wife. He gave me a reason to reach out my hand. Chance is asleep by the fire as I write this, his white-striped neck rising and falling, his paws twitching in some dream I hope is a kind one. He's an old dog now. So am I. Neither of us has forever, and we both know it in the wordless way that broken things know things. But we've got tonight, and the fire's warm, and when he wakes up he'll find me here, same as always, the one thing that's exactly what it's always been. That's enough. For a man who thought he was finished, it's more than enough. It's everything.